Hello, hello, hello. Welcome back to the I'm on a Mission podcast. Today, we got some fun in store for you guys. To start off, we got some NBA trade news, but I can't really get the details right, so uh, it's, it's, it's still cool. And then we talk a little about the NFC South. They kind of suck now, but we think they're kind of cool still, so tune in and have some fun. Hello, welcome back. Excited to talk more sports, obviously, but obviously there's big news with the NBA trades going crazy. Draft happened. How to have too much input on that? I mean, I feel like top players went where they were, but obviously the trades is what everybody's talking about, and so um, we have the first, I guess, big piece of news that happened not too long ago, but it was still the Warriors and the Wizards trading. The details here is the Warriors, they got Chris Paul, and then the Wizards got Jordan Poole, Ryan Rollins, projected 2030 first round pick, and then the 2027 second round pick. Um, yeah, so I guess what are your thoughts on just that trade initially?
Yeah, no, a lot of good NBA news happened over the past week. In true podcast fashion, we always record a day before the big news drops, apparently. So we always
Yeah.
miss out on these. So
Yeah,
now,
so
now's the
stay
chance
tuned for
for everybody.
tomorrow's big news. You already know what's going to happen.
Yeah, free agency. The blockbuster deals are going to occur. OG Anunoby's going to go somewhere. Fred VanVleet's going to sign a mega contract, and we'll miss. But it's all in good fun. I enjoy talking about these. Looking at the state of the roster and projecting what teams look like. Um, I think it's a good move for the Warriors from the standpoint that a lot of people are looking at their starting lineup and saying, "This is not going to work. This is not going to work," because they think Chris Paul is going to be joining that starting lineup with the team. I don't see it that way. I think they want to go back to their 2014, 2015 days when they had Sean Livingston as a really good focal point for that second team offense to spell Stephen Curry and Klay Thompson. And I know this is not a good look for Chris Paul transitioning into that role, but I think he'll be a really good option to throw like a curveball, if you will, on the basketball court compared to like Steph Curry because you're not going to expect Chris Paul to just suddenly start launching it from like the quarter half line or like by the half court line, like 30-foot bombs. Like that's not who he is. He's a very methodical player, a very different style. And what it allows the Warriors to do is run two different offenses almost and have the elite teams in the Western Conference game plan for that. So I think this is a savvy move. Um, there's a lot of like obviously we heard like what happened between Jordan Poole and Draymond, where Draymond punched him in the face all before last season in training camp, and how that affected the team to such a degree. So I think from a culture perspective, this alleviates a little bit of that and allows Draymond Green to be the leader of that team. And yes, I'm assuming he's going to sign back with the Warriors because if you paid attention to GM Mike Dunleavy's point on wants to prioritize. He wants to prioritize the core that won the championships. So that's Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, and Draymond Green. He's going to keep Draymond Green out front right there and right now. And I think Draymond Green wants to stay there because of the chemistry he has with Steph Curry and Klay Thompson. So I like this move a lot more than the general public might.
Hmm.
I think this is going to be good. Yes, they still have to dress moves on the wings and defense, and then tinker with their lineups with the bigs because I think the two big lineup doesn't work against teams like Denver or LA. So they have to be a little bit more flexible and have to get the personnel to match that. But
Hmm.
good side for the Warriors. This is potentially good for the Wizards. They're still a project team, but I would be careful with Jordan Poole, like as a
Hmm.
starting option there because yeah, he can get his numbers, but now teams are going to game plan for him.
Hmm.
He's the number one option on that team now. So how's he going to react to that?
Hmm. Yeah, and I also, I guess, contrary to most of the public's opinions on this trade, I do think the Warriors do benefit from this as well. I think what we saw in the playoffs at least is like, the Warriors can be dominant like literally anytime they want. But kind of they struggled with some consistency here and there, and I think that a guy like Chris Paul can kind of help, I guess, bring things together for that team when maybe they kind of go cold for a little bit. And so I just think that having him there is just like the presence of him almost is just as beneficial as, I guess, his playmaking ability, which I think is good for any playoff team that, any playoff team can benefit from that type of player. So I think it's good. It may not be what the Warriors fans are looking for, but yeah, I think that overall this could benefit them.
Yeah, and when you think about like when they had this young group of promising players to transition to the next arc after that trio would eventually retire and Curry, Thompson, Green, and they would hope it would be James Wiseman, Jordan Poole, Jonathan Kuminga, Gary Payton, and so forth. But that hasn't really panned out the way they thought. And I think by bringing in Chris Paul, it's going to help the development of Jonathan Kuminga, Gary Payton, second, and then other key pieces there, Kevon Looney. Like just like Chris Paul helped out DeAndre Ayton. I
Hmm.
think this is a good move from that standpoint. So they're trying to think both ends here, and I can't really fault them for that. As for the Wizards, I'll get into this pretty quickly, but right now, like the projected guards that I like, Jordan Poole, Tyus Jones, Johnny Davis, Monty Morris, Landry Shamet, they have a lot of really good guards that can play and playing contributing roles, but I still think their forwards, even with the addition of Koulibaly from the draft and Avita, that what they have they still need a lot of upgrades there as far as defenders, guys that can play defense and
Hmm.
experienced veterans there. And Gafford can play; he's a contributor, and they just got Muscala. But I think that's going to be the weakness of their team, like those big guys on the team, where they can't get over the play-in hump next year. That's what I think is going to happen.
Yeah, and I think as a rebuilding team, I feel like Chris Paul doesn't add too much, I guess, value to future goals. I mean, he is good for, I guess, development, but I feel like you don't bring him in like specifically for development, and so it makes sense that the Wizards made this move. But obviously, there's another huge trade that happened too. It's a three-team one, which is always a bit fun and exciting. But it was between I think the Clippers, the Celtics, and the Wizards, right?
I th- I thought the Clippers backed
No,
out of that. Did they not?
that was I don't know. Maybe I saw the wrong one. Yeah, it
Oh
was a
no.
different one. No, I don't know. I pulled up the wrong one. Maybe.
No, it was the Wizards because Tyus Jones went to the Wizards um, from the Grizzlies. So it was the Grizzlies, it was the
Oh yeah,
Wizards,
yeah.
and then
I saw the
Celtics.
first like
Yeah,
mock-up of the trade. Yeah.
that was the trade that
Regardless,
was supposed to happen.
yeah. I mean, regardless, a three-way trade did happen, which is exciting. Obviously the big names Marcus Smart and Kristaps. Everyone's kind of talking about the impact they would have on their teams. Obviously, other players are moderately important, but these are the main two. Who do you think? I guess was there a winner in the trade? Did you think there was a loser? Did you think it was pretty even across? Or
Um, I think the obviously the Celtics and the Grizzlies come out winners in this for different reasons. Um, I didn't like this for the Celtics on the surface when I first saw this because Marcus Smart just won Defensive Player of the Year a year ago, and he's the culture of that team. I don't think you just trade him away to try and make changes for the sake of changes. I don't think he was the problem on that team. There are a lot of like shots where he just got unlucky in the moment, but he's one of the defensive anchors on that team from the guard spot. So I found out a little bit odd that they traded him until I saw the compensation and how Porzingis played over the past season. Porzingis had one of his best offensive seasons last year. Like
Mhm.
he's also a force near the rim. So if you're thinking about Robert Williams and your concerns with him getting hurt as a Celtics fan, Porzingis adds an extra body to that regard, and plus he can stretch the floor and add some different scoring dynamics that you didn't have, where you were just relying on Robert Williams from like the lob and pick and roll stuff that caused fits, but you didn't have to worry about him being a shooter. Now with Porzingis, he can do all of that and shoot from the outside. So I think that gives you an extra dynamic. Plus, they got a couple first round picks in
Mhm.
return for that, so that was a really good deal for them. Um, Obviously, with the John Morant suspension, having a veteran like Marcus Smart in there will definitely help the young guys and at least improve the culture of that move. I think this is a great move. I saw this post where Marcus Smart's journey mirrored Tony Allen, one of the great defensive players,
Hmm.
um, who started out with the Celtics, went to the Eastern Conference Finals, went to an NBA Finals game, then joined the Grizzlies at the same age, and then just seeing those parallels was so funny to me because Marcus Smart went to the same college as Tony Allen in Oklahoma State, and
Hmm.
I'm just like, you got to be kidding me! You can't make this up. So
Hmm.
shows how the NBA is cyclical, I guess. But it's a great move for the Grizzlies because Tyus Jones can be a starting point guard anywhere. I think the Wizards saw that, and that's why they wanted him. Um, but having Marcus Smart kind of alleviates that and gives them a proven starting guard
Hmm.
that can facilitate for them while Ja Morant's out. If you
Yeah.
look at their roster, it's it's one of the top tier rosters in the NBA, even with Ja Morant getting suspended. Like Desmond Bain can create on his own. Jaren Jackson's an absolute force that's underrated. Steven Adams is coming back. You still have Luke Kennard, Brandon Clark who's also coming back. Um, Zaire Williams did some really good things. Then you have Xavier Tillman who played admirably against the Lakers, in my opinion. And Aldama showed a couple things. So you have a couple pieces there, and that's at least 6 or 7 deep that gives you some room to wiggle while John Morant's
Yeah, and yeah, I think it's good for both the Celtics and the Grizzlies here. I think, um, obviously, they had, I guess, heartbreaking losses in the playoffs. I think both of them expected themselves to do a little bit better than what they did, and so obviously both are good. I guess like defensive players. Looking at Smart and Porzingis, but I guess they're trying to change. They wanted something to change, and feel like these are almost safe pieces to trade while still being able to like bring in a big impact, which I think it feels almost tame. Like you get that, right? Where it's like,
From what sense? What like as far as like
where
compared to past years in blockbuster trades?
I mean, it's like I guess the risk reward, I guess, is like you're giving. They're like similar but very different players at the same time. Where like they
Yeah.
bring almost similar value. Like obviously, different styles of players, but they bring that similar value, and that is more so like a culture change. But you're getting a similar type of player, and then you're just trying to build on what you had last year, which I think is kind of just an
It's
interesting
definitely
trade.
going to be different. Like from a leadership standpoint, which is a little underrated for this kind of team, it's
Hmm.
going to be different because now it's on Jalen Brown and Jason Tatum to lead the charge, whereas they
Yeah.
didn't have to do that when Marcus Smart was there. We'll see like how Porzingis like fits into that culture mold. I think he'll be fine. It's just like when this team has its downs, who's the leader that's going to step up? Because even with Marcus Smart there, they had a problem against the Heat where they weren't playing up to their potential. Even against the Sixers, they weren't playing up to their potential and playing at that consistent level. And it ended up biting them in the finals last year and in the series against the Heat. So it, I hear you. I hear you from the on the basketball court. This is like they bring different dynamics, but the same similar skill sets you need offensive and defense wise. But what's that culture fit going to look like? It'll be an interesting watch.
Hmm. Yeah. I feel like that's most we got for the trades. Do you have any other, I guess, points you want to bring up for either of the trades or?
My points are just on the free agency, the
Mhm.
free agency period coming up, because that's always a fun sector to look at, especially after the draft. It's kind of a polar opposite approach to how the NFL works. But I think a couple guys to keep an eye on that are obviously not like your James Harden type or Kyrie Irving level players, but still as impactful. Um, Fred Van Vliet, I think he's a really good starting point guard. Whoever gets him, that would be amazing if the Bulls can get him. I don't think they have the money, but any team that can land him is great. Jeremy Grant, really underrated wing. He did a lot of good things for Portland. I expect Portland to rebound this year, even with speculation on where's Dame going to go and their draft picks being super young. Cameron Johnson's a restricted free agent. Um, if I were Brooklyn, I would resign him. He's a really good starting wing that can only get better, um, and he's not talked about enough as one of the the most underrated wings. He's not talked about enough. I'll leave it at that. He's had really good shooting. He can defend. That's all you can ask for from a role player, and plus he can create on his own. And one other guy who had a down year, but I expect him to rebound in the right system is Jakob Poeltl. He was amazing, amazing, absolutely amazing on the Spurs. He had one down year against the Raptors, so I don't think the market's as strong on him.
Hmm.
But he's another guy that's kind of like your Domantas Sabonis like player. Like you're not going to talk about him enough, but he is still an effective center that can hold his own on both sides of the ball.
Yeah. See, Derrick Rose is the best player.
I hope we get him, man. It'll be crazy if it comes back. That would be awesome. Like especially if he comes back, especially with Lonzo hurt. Like he's supposedly out for the rest of the season next year already. But if you can get Rose, my heart, man. I loved it when he was playing in his prime. I still feel sad to this day on how it ended up.
Yeah. Even though he hasn't had like obviously the career we all hoped for, I'm always excited when I see Derrick Rose on the court. It makes me happy, and I don't know where he'll go, but I feel like he's pretty good at what he was doing, off the bench. And obviously, both of us being from Chicago, we love talking about Derrick Rose. He's like one of my favorite players all time. I don't know about you, but
I wanted to be like Derrick Rose. Like back when I had pipe dreams and wanted to try out for my middle school and high school teams, I wanted to play exactly like Derrick Rose because he's just so dynamic. You watch him on the court and like it's kind of like watching a superhero like on the basketball court, just with the acrobatics and his finishes and the explosiveness. It's insane. Like a lot of people like love Derrick Rose, wanted to be like him. He had that level of impact, and there's just an unfortunate situation with timing and injuries that he can't really predict for that really derailed that team.
Yeah, yeah. I remember I had one friend. His like social media handle was like Jake Rose, just because like he's Derrick Rose's favorite player, and I feel like if anyone from Chicago that likes basketball has like a spot in their heart for Derrick Rose, which I really like. I love it when like when Derrick Rose, he comes from like a visiting team to Chicago and like the crowd chants for him, and I'm sure that's like
he deserves it. He's from there. He balled lights out. He lived up to the hype when he was healthy. It's just unfortunate how it turned out on the court in his prime. Like he was Ja Morant before Ja Morant. Like that's how good he was.
Yeah, but yeah. It would make it a lot easier to get a Derrick Rose jersey too if you went back to Chicago for just a year. But that's
on my wish list.
Yeah,
if I can still get one, I would love one.
Yeah, now you just got to look on eBay or something. But yeah, I don't know. Overall, I'm not super well versed with the free agents. Obviously, I know like some of the big names and whatnot, but I don't know. I feel like my takes are probably just the ESPN takes that I hear from ESPN or whatever. But obviously, I pay attention to the Heat. I think the Heat hopefully look to bring a more like I guess a more consistent score. That I think that's something that we're looking for that could play
Max
two ways
Strus?
a little bit better. Max Strus, yeah, the one and only Max Strus. Yeah,
I know how much you love him.
Yeah, I mean he's overall. I mean he played good throughout the season at points. It just a bad run for him. But if they let him go, then I feel like you have Gabe Vincent there, who obviously I don't think he played really great during the playoffs, but obviously he still is a liability as like a full-time starter, I think, throughout the entire season. So I'd hope that they bring, whether it be, guard, center, forward, just someone that can more consistently, I guess, shoot the ball so that the Heat don't go into that many awful runs.
Yeah.
Because I felt like that killed them a lot.
They had this issue in the regular season with shooting. And then all of a sudden in the playoffs, it suddenly like looked like they had it. And then in the finals, like Strus had a couple of bad stretches. Duncan Robinson made some egregious errors early, and it just kind of like snowballed from there, where you could see a clear talent difference.
Yeah,
they need a talent infusion or just pure development.
Yeah, because I feel like you saw that throughout the playoffs for the Heat, but just other players really stepping up, kind of I guess covered the fact that players were really lacking at times, and so. Yeah, but that's what I hope for the Heat. It's probably the most I got for free agency right now. But yeah, we don't want to take too much time with the NBA today. Just we got a lot of NFL, I guess, stuff to talk about today. Is the NFC South, and so we'll just kind of kick into that. We're going over records. Saints looks like it'll be the first one that we talk about. So you want to pull that up?
Yep. Looking at this team, I think they can win the division. I believe you do as well. Let me hide the banner real quick. But it's really interesting looking at this division because we had different perspectives on how we think each team is going to finish. I don't believe we had a winning record for any of the teams in the division. And
Yeah.
I have the Saints winning at 10-7. So just goes to show like this is one of the few divisions where like the talent gap is kind of similar to its South counterpart in the AFC, where it's going to be like trying years for most of these teams, like still under like the rebuilding stages or like still like trying to get that talent to develop that they drafted 2 or 3 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess my overall, opinion on this division is the fact that a team with Tom Brady on it, and just I guess the cast around Brady went 8-9 last year, and it's like how better are these teams compared to that 8-9 Buccaneers squad? And well, I do think that the Saints could be one of those teams that do win 10-7. I said this literally every podcast. The Saints are one of those teams that can win games that they shouldn't and lose games that they also shouldn't. And so I do believe that, a 10-7 to 7-10 record is pretty feasible. I feel like that is their likely range to go. Obviously, I feel like we have a few games that we have like matching, but we also have a lot of games flip flop. Despite we have at least I have 7 games won, which is still just only 3 off from what you got.
Yeah, and I think we got there like floor to ceiling, like the in between, like just about correct here in this. So um I don't really mind that you have them at 7 wins. That's certainly a possibility with this team. I think the Derek Carr edition is a little bit underrated for this specific team because if you look at the quarterback play they had last year, it was just a bunch of like backups and like trying to get a starting production out of it where there were a lot of injuries that happened and a
Mm-hmm.
lot of changes on that team that didn't allow them to get into that consistency you want to see from the Saints.
Mm-hmm.
So while I get it, Kamara's going most likely going to be suspended. We're still trying to figure out how many games he's suspended for. I believe they have a lot more stable pieces around their
Mm-hmm.
offensive core, and I actually think they could be one of the best offenses in the league as far as production.
Mm-hmm.
That allows them to, if you look at matchups against like Green Bay or the Texans or even the Lions, even though I had them losing there,
Mm-hmm.
and the Giants and the Rams and the Buccaneers, where we have differences. I could see them win those games more often than they did last year against the
Mm-hmm.
same caliber opponents, just because they have that consistency at quarterback now, and they've added to the wide receiver room.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like I guess it's like a combination of like their opponents as well, I think, are in that range of like starting to get good. And so that's what makes me, I guess, not having them improve upon last season's record, at least from this initial take that I have. But, I do look at their roster and I do think that they do have the potential. They certainly have the potential to be one of the best uh, offenses in the league and potentially one of the better defenses in the league as well. It just anticipating everything, I guess, just working out for the team, which has been, I guess, the concern over the past couple seasons where, I feel like they've had a lot of key players, key pieces, and it's just like they've been so close, but so far at the same time, which has killed them down the stretch.
Yeah, and that's exactly it. Is Derek Carr the answer to that?
Mm-hmm.
I think if the way they're structured right now, he doesn't have to be. Like
Mm-hmm.
he just has to be like that point guard that gives it to the right guy. And
Mm-hmm.
you have Olave in the second year if he can make that jump where you're not relying on Michael Thomas to be that number one wide receiver that misses half the season and you're frustrated by it because you know you could be a lot better, but you just don't have the pieces. Now they have Olave. Now he can serve as the one, and Michael Thomas can serve as the one in certain spots, or really good too. And if he gets hurt, you still have a one that you can build your offense around, and you have key guys that stepped up, well, like Rashid Shaheed. You brought in Foster Moreau now, who I'm really high on. Jawan Johnson had some good things. Now you added Jamal Williams and Kendra Miller, both of who I think are really good backs who can produce when Kamara is not there. And when Kamara gets back, he's the number one focal point that teams are going to pay attention to. So I look at all of that from what they have personnel wise. That's completely different from last year as far as development and what they've added. And I look at the defense, defensive minded coach, familiar with Derek Carr. He knows how to play around Derek Carr. They still have really, really good pieces on the defensive end, which we'll talk about. They have Ohio State University as their defensive back room, so I think that's always good. But this is a well-rounded team. The one question is, can the quarterback produce when you're going against San Francisco level talent, Philadelphia level talent, I think Seahawks level talent now, Dallas defense level talent, those kind of teams. If they can, this team could make it to the divisional round and beyond. I think their ceiling's really high.
Yeah. Yeah, and even though like I have them going, 7-10, I still believe that I have this team winning the division, which theoretically which theoretically means that they do get. I feel like the Buccaneers might be the other thing. I don't even think I don't know if I have the Buccaneers doing this well, but yeah. So this team, if they, they suck in the beginning, they get hot at the end and have this really bad record. But I feel like in the playoffs, if things start to look good at the end of the season, they could make that deep run, which I think is really funny about this team and just kind of really exciting. They're just a really interesting talent, or I guess just an interesting unit of players that I hope does well. I feel like there's just a lot of, I guess, question marks of like, can they continue, or can they, I guess, progress to what they need to be with, the addition of a new quarterback, few new other key pieces around the team. But I guess we can just go straight into the roster. We basically talked about their whole roster already, but here is their offense.
Already.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess what are the pieces you like, maybe you don't like about this offense right now?
I like how their quarterback room has changed for the better. I feel it's a lot more deep, and it's not counting on Taysom Hill to be like one of their starting quarterbacks game in and game out. And if you looked at their statistics as far as breakdowns, like Taysom Hill like threw for 20 passes. Jameis Winston threw for 100 passes, and you have like Dalton throwing for like sub 400 passes, and you like none of them hit 3,000 yards. Like the average of attempts was like 7 basically, except for Taysom Hill, because you got the scheme plays to take into account, and the yards per game never exceeded 300. I think that's easily solved when you add Derek Carr to the list, and you have Jameis Winston playing as the backup, because both are capable of throwing for 300 yards in any given game. And I really like their quarterback pick on Jake Hayner, who has the 3rd round development rookie. He's a really good rookie who can play inside the pocket and make sound decisions. I think that part's not talked about enough. And I believe he also went to Fresno State. So having him play under Derek Carr and learning from Derek Carr, who's a seasoned professional now, is going to be extremely important for his development, and he doesn't have the pressure starting right away. Same thing with their running back room, very deep. If I look at the wide receiver room, we didn't even talk about A.T. Perry, one of the smartest wide receivers coming out of the draft from Wake Forest. And I love all of their second group of guys in the wide receiver room. I love Brian Edwards. I think their wide receiver room is a lot more equipped to handle losing Michael Thomas if he gets hurt. I love their tight end group. I just think their skill positions are a lot more developed and deeper than what they had last year.
Yeah, I like a lot of the players on this team too. I my own personal speculation, I do think that the Saints wouldn't be opposed to shopping Michael Thomas sometime this year, just because, I mean, yes, he can be a phenomenal receiver, but if you can't rely on his consistency, it's kind of hard to I guess figure out what you want to do for the future with that. And I think that there are guys in this wide receiver room that can step up. Like I like Rashid Shaheed, A.T. Perry, he's good. Brian Edwards. I feel like the second he's been in the league, everybody's talked about him. I feel like he has the potential to do good. At this stage in his career, I'm like leaning less towards that. Just he's had plenty of opportunity, I guess. At
He's
this
the training
stage,
camp darling that doesn't show up after week 2.
yeah, every offseason everyone talks about him. He's like, oh, Brian Edwards looking to step up, and he's actually not a starter. They decided to get this McDonald's employee to play over him, despite him having a phenomenal preseason and a phenomenal training camp, and all his teammates loved him. He saved a baby out of a fire, and he's the greatest man. But actually, we don't like him anymore. I don't know. It's a weird situation, but I feel like in this wide receiver room, obviously some of these guys aren't as good, but I feel like I recognize a lot of names on this receiver room, which is pretty cool to see. Granted, I feel like I pay a little bit too much attention to football sometimes, and so I probably know a little bit more than I need to. Like Lynn Bowden Jr., like I've heard of him. I've definitely heard of him. I think I've looked at him on like fantasy sports at one point. Just I'm like, oh, who's this guy?
QT. He was one time really good on the Texans.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but yeah, the guy I really like. I like Rashid Shaheed. I think he can be an X factor for this team just because he has. I guess he's just great run. He has great run after the catch ability. Which I think I don't know. It just adds like an extra dynamic, especially with just how fast he is. I know he's listed as like their special teams return man. I love their tight ends, Jawan Johnson. I think he honestly could be like in terms of fantasy, like a borderline tight end 1 this season. Obviously, because Derek Carr, he likes throwing to his tight ends. I think he has a good connection. He has a good history of tight ends over Foster Moreau in his scheme. So we'll see what happens with Johnson here. But I feel like the most, I guess, interesting group in this offense is their offensive line. I think they're a really good run block offensive line, which obviously suits the team well, especially with just the running backs that you have. But I do think they lack quite a lot in pass blocking. Obviously, Trevor Penning, he didn't do great. He was a great run blocker, but he was pretty awful in pass. And then Ryan Ramczyk, he has played good. He obviously had a down year last season, and I think the Saints are really hopeful on this offensive line. I guess going back into form and I guess Penning developing farther, because if he doesn't, that kind of sucks from the left tackle position.
Yeah, it's very tough to replace Teron Armstead. Like when you have a bookend tackle like that who could do it all. And if he plays well, I think the rest of this team could, look out. And they have a really good backup center in Billy Price too. So I'm a huge fan of the starting offensive line. We'll see how long, or how good the backup offensive linemen are. We spoke about this on the podcast about Foster Moreau. I think he's if he gets the opportunity to start and gets priority targets, like playing off of Chris Olave, he could have a tight end 1 fantasy season if they rely on him that way. I certainly think he has the talent to do so. He's like one of those sleeper tight end picks. I wouldn't, but like if you can't get like Travis Kelce or Mark Andrews or George Kittle, like those level guys, like he's the perfect guy to place a bet on because he has familiarity with Derek Carr. He has a lot of skill sets you want from a top 5 tight end. He needs the opportunity. We'll see if he can beat out Jawan Johnson. I remain hopeful on him. But I love what you said about Rashid Shaheed because he is the key to making everything of this work. He does a really good job of also selling his routes when he has outbreaking and in-breaking routes, selling his route the other way to create space. And that also, it's a change up to his deep speed on the streak routes you see, or the post routes he runs. If he plays up to the level he did last year and even better than that, this could be one of the top offenses in the NFL. I'm not even stuttering on that. Because you look at Kamara, Olave, Thomas, and the tight end depth they have, and the fact they can throw changeups with Taysom Hill, and they have a functional QB now. What is not to like about their offense?
Yeah, I'm excited. I think there's a lot of, I guess, and again, going back to fantasy, there's a lot of, I guess, fantasy viable players on this team, which can be scary just because you don't know who, I guess, will hit. But I feel like a lot,
Olave is
um,
gonna hit. He's gonna hit.
well, yeah, I mean, but still, I mean, like each one of these players has that potential to take over a game, and you're just gonna be mad that why did I why did I start Olave when Shaheed got 2 touchdowns and 100 yards receiving just because he can do that on games. But yeah, going I guess next to the defense, which I mean it's pretty solid too. You have a lot of good players. I actually really like this team, despite the record I gave them. It's just the record I gave them.
Yeah, if you look at their back four, like the cornerbacks and the safeties, like this is as good as you can get it, dude. Like
Hmm.
Jonathan Abram as your backup safety, Marcus May, Tyron Matthew, and then you have Bradley Roby as your backup cornerback. You have a Debo and Lattimore. Like that's an elite starting secondary as a collective unit. Like that's perfect to have on your team. And Demario Davis is still there. Peak Werner played out of his mind last year. I was high on Bond coming out of the draft, and then you have Cam and Jordan.
Hmm.
There's a lot of really good pieces here. And they got Kalen Saunders now, who I thought did a phenomenal job on the Chiefs. So I don't know too much about the other front, the two pieces on there for like Nathan Shepard and Carl Granderson. Um, I think if you're playing opposite Jordan, you're gonna have those one-on-one opportunities to win. But Brian Bresee was also another defensive tackle we talked about in the draft. We loved him when we went through our mocks. And if he takes over for the defensive tackle next to Kalen Saunders, I would not be surprised.
Hmm.
Like their defensive line is not as deep as in past years, in my opinion. But this is still a really good front 11 defense starting out.
Hmm. Yeah, I really like this secondary too. It might be the strong suit of this defense. I'm a huge fan of their, I guess, starting four secondary members. Bradley Roby, he's played decent. I think, yeah, him going into kind of like a CB3 role is probably better for him. That's where he succeeded in the past. And obviously he's had success as like a cornerback 1 or 2, but I think 3 is the best spot for him. And obviously Jonathan Abram hasn't had, I guess, the career people had hoped he did, when he first got drafted. But it'll be interesting to see, I guess, can he bounce back, especially with just a better, I guess, surrounding cast around him. Um, and so I think, yeah, all the starters, they look pretty good. But I think back again last season where, I mean, you had a majority of these guys here. Obviously, you have a couple of really good additions here, but I mean, you had a lot of these guys, but they still had those games where they struggled. And so it's, again, can they stay consistent? Can this team, gel together? And obviously, again, injuries happened and yada, yada, yada. But I mean, injuries will continue to happen. I don't know who, or hopefully no one gets hurt, obviously. But think, yeah, just making sure that, the guys that aren't starting, like the younger players, they are developing well is a huge part about this defense, both, I guess, on the offensive side as well. But uh, yeah, I like their kicker too. He's a cool guy.
But Lutz is all reliable. And in short, this comes down to two people, in my opinion, that can really make this offense one consistent, and two. I'm gonna say this and repeat it again. They could be one of the most explosive offenses in the NFL that people don't see coming. Really take a look at this team because they have a variety of options. They're deep on options where they still have contributors to fill in. I would not sleep on this team just because they don't have the top tier quarterback you see in the AFC. But it comes down to Derek Carr and can he stay healthy and produce as a point guard role, if not better than that, given the weapons they have on that team. And it comes down to Shaheed. Can he be that difference maker when teams try to shut down Olave? Because if he can, watch out.
Hmm. Yeah, I'm excited to watch this team this upcoming season. I think they are the best in this division, but I mean that's not saying too much either. But
I don't want to hear from you, dude. You had them at 7-10. I can't believe that.
it is what it is. But we can go on to the Falcons and talk about how great they're going to be too. So, here's our Falcons. Obviously, they're a great team.
This I understand, but we'll get into it.
Yeah, you have them getting 6 wins. I have half of that, 3. Obviously, we both don't see them super highly. I think that this team has potential to play better than these records, but um, I don't. If I make up my own ESPN stat of random percentages, I think this isn't a very high percentage chance that potential is fully reached for this team. They got like a 12.87% chance via ESPN to fully reach their max potential here. But I think just looking at this team and looking at the teams they go against, just yeah, I feel like this is just despite I don't know, it just feels like they're not going to do so well this year. And obviously, you assume the same.
For me, it's the quarterback play.
Hmm.
I didn't like Desmond Ridder as much as other people did coming out of college, despite how well Cincinnati did. I think it was more of the product of like their surrounding cast that they had. With I believe Jerome Ford was on that team, and then you had
Hmm.
Alec Pierce coming out of Cincinnati, who's a seller for them, and you just had so many great options from that team and blocking wise. It was a similar thing like Baker Mayfield coming out of the draft,
Hmm.
and if he improves, this team could be a playoff team. They could end up
Hmm.
winning the division. But I think we're both low on him. Like we're not fans of Desmond Ridder.
Hmm.
And just they have a lot of great offensive stars where like I could easily see them win half the games that I project them to lose.
Hmm.
Because they have a great trio in London that Kyle Pitts and Bijan Robinson now, who I'm really high on. I think he's the second coming of Saquon with a technical game, which is speaking a lot for him. I just think they're super young,
Hmm.
and you need that veteran QB to really maximize their potential, especially Drake London. Drake London is a phenomenal talent. I just don't think Desmond Ridder is going to maximize him enough to beat these teams and really use their talents well up to it.
Hmm.
I could be proven wrong, but I I can easily see them losing as low as 3 games. Like this is more reasonable.
Yeah, and I just like obviously it's hard to speculate till the next year's draft, but like imagine they're in a position to get Caleb Williams or Drake May, and just like
Oh
imagine. I
my
feel like
goodness,
like
dude, are you
imagine
serious?
yeah, like imagine this team with one of those two elite prospect quarterbacks at the helm here. I think a Drake to Drake could be kind of funny. Just social media, ESPN social media would love it so much. But but I
Dude,
just
if
think
the
it.
Falcons had Drake May or Caleb Williams, this would be like the best, like one of the best teams in their division, if not the conference, for the next 10 years. I am not
Yeah.
stuttering. The level of awesome offensive talent to keep that
Hmm.
core four together, unbelievable. Like
Hmm.
unbelievable. That's how much of a difference like our predictions on their record based on the QB situation they have
Hmm.
now and who they could potentially get next year is. That's
Yeah.
crazy.
Yeah. So obviously we're pretty hyped for their offense. We'll kind of go straight into that right now. Yeah. Here we have famous Desmond Ritter as the starting quarterback. Um, I actually am a fan of Taylor Heineke. Obviously, he's not a great quarterback, but he's shown to be a really good backup, and I feel like he can be a back for the next while in the NFL, which is pretty nice. It's a nice gig to have. I wish I could be a backup NFL quarterback. Life would be good.
To be fair to
But,
him, like every time he had the spot start, he did absolutely amazing. Like I remember that one playoff game where he almost
mhm.
took down Tom Brady and the Buccaneers,
Yeah, that
and
was
like on their
crazy.
yeah, he was like on the money, and I'm just like, dude, if you give him a QB like Sean McVay, like he can do some things, and I
Hmm.
think Arthur Smith's a really good offensive mind, so he's able to scheme plays open. for teams. But in the NFL, it's still going to come down to your third and fourth downs, like third and sevens, third and tens. And we just haven't seen enough from Desmond Ritter to be confident that he's going to convert those more than 50% of the time.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah,
a
I
little
think.
bit unfair to him.
Mhm.
Because he is still a young player. He still has to
Mhm.
develop. But if he pulls a Justin Herbert, the rest of this team is like the sky's the limit, despite what the
Mhm.
second and third receivers look like.
Yeah.
I'm actually a big fan of Frank Darby. I love Frank Darby. I think he could
Mhm.
easily like take a starting role from Matt Collins or Scotty Miller.
Mhm.
But I still think this offense is going to run through Bijan Robinson, Drake London, and Kyle Pitts,
Mhm.
and you'll sprinkle in Algier and Patterson in like
Mhm.
scheme type plays.
Mhm. Yeah, I feel like the tricky part, I guess, with this team is because we don't have them doing well. Like, if they're doing bad, with Desmond Ritter, it's like, is there really a reason to switch to Heineke with how old he is? You're not trying to see, can Heineke be the guy? And so it's like, do you tank the whole season with Ritter if you are doing bad? Or I feel like Heineke's just in a weird spot to be a quarterback right now, which is unfortunate. But yeah, overall, yeah, I think this has potential to be a really good team. I feel like, I guess, the depth behind in wide receiver is probably the weak point of this offense. Obviously, you like guys like Frank Darby. I think Hollins and Miller are both like good. I guess can be good in like specific plays written up for them or in specific schemes, but I don't think they're
I
that
like them
great.
as wide receiver fours or fives. I don't like them like as starting wide receivers.
Yeah, yeah. I guess I'm somewhat comfortable with Miller as like a 3, but yeah, again, it's like Hollins is like a 2. Like, I don't know if I like that, and even Miller, I don't like him as a 2. So I'm like, I feel like you're hoping that one of these guys steps up to the number 2 spot. Obviously, they're not in. I mean, they're still in that rebuild mode. I think, especially just because I feel like they're a few key pieces away from being a winning team. So you still have a couple years, I think, to get that number 2 guy behind Drake London, because I do think that Drake London played really well last season. I feel like he just got overshadowed by a couple other superstar wide receivers last season, and I think he's looking to build on a really good season from last year, and then I do think that their O line might be the best in the division. Obviously, it's like they don't have, I guess, the star power name that people, I guess, look for an offensive lineman. I feel like your average fan may not know everybody on this offensive line, but they played really well last season. They're a good run blocking offensive line, which is kind of the focal point of this offense, which I really like. And I feel like they're really good at covering their weaknesses, which made me really like it. Rather than yeah, they're not going to like blow you away with their offensive line ability, but you can, I guess, trust him to stay consistently above average, which is a really big and important thing for NFL offenses.
Yeah, one of the tackle targets I wanted the Bears to get was Caleb McGarry if he was
Mm-hmm.
available. I think their tackles are probably the best in the division right now.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I I wouldn't say their whole offensive line as a whole is the best. I might give that to Carolina,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe at one time Tampa Bay, but I think Carolina has a better set of offensive lines from like the best five. But what
Mm-hmm.
a great situation you have in a quarterback prospect like Ritter right now, where you have two bookend tackles, you have a lot of great weapons. It's just a matter of can you fill that role. And I think we didn't talk about this enough. You don't have to use Kyle Pitts in line anymore when you're thinking about passing sets and what he has to do. He can just focus on being a weapon, an offensive weapon, because you got Jonnu Smith. Jonnu Smith can do a lot of like the inline blocking stuff you need, like the underneath drag routes to free up Kyle Pitts, because he's also a threat in the red zone as well. So there's a lot of variables with like Jonnu Smith and Pitts dynamic
Mm-hmm.
that is going to help Pitts, and it's also going to help Bijan Robinson for getting the touchdowns you need out of a
Mm-hmm.
running back pass. I believe he's like running back 6 or 7 right now in fantasy drafts. I wouldn't take him that high just because I like the other level talents there. But I know a lot of wide receivers are going early in the first round now. I wouldn't mind grabbing a wide receiver, but people are sleeping on Nick Chubb and Jonathan Taylor. Like I would pick them over Bijan Robinson for this upcoming season, um, even though they might not have like the best situation that
Mhm.
Bijan does. I think they're much more proven talents, but make no mistake about it, Bijan's going to be a tear for like the next 5 to 7 years on
Mhm.
this team.
Yeah, and I think that both this team and the Saints could be teams that run a lot of two tight end sets. Just with I
I
guess
agree.
the overall depth that they have here, and I guess the kind of question marks both teams have surrounding wide receiver. Obviously, I do think that the Saints can have an elite wide receiver room, but obviously, that's anticipating Michael Thomas stays healthy, Rashid Shaheed, builds on what he has last season, and then all the guys behind him. I think they're good at at wide receiver 4, 5, and 6, but it's their question marks, going up to that wide receiver 2 and 3, and so I feel like both these teams can play it pretty well, running you 2 or 3 tight end sets, which I mean makes sense just looking at these rosters. I mean, like look at the running backs for these Falcons, like Bijan, like going into this draft. Like Bijan Robinson really wasn't even a consideration for me to draft for them, just because Tyler Algier had a phenomenal year last season. He didn't even start the whole year, and he was averaging about 5 yards a carry and like 1,000 rush yards on the season or something like that. Plus, you had Cordero Patterson, who um he had a huge career resurgence here too, and so I'm just thinking, that duo could probably play another couple seasons as an elite running back duo, and they just added Bijan to that group, and so it's like it's how can you stop this bunch? Caleb Huntley also played pretty well last season in the limited playing time that he had, so I do think that this team would probably do, if they're trying to make a deep playoff run, they probably lean really heavy into that power run game, which I wouldn't blame them for, especially with their offensive line.
Yeah, I think Algiers like production was a lot to do with like the transition to gap scheme, because you
Hmm.
really saw that across like the league, like that transition to gap scheme running from
Hmm.
like previous zone running really lend itself once you saw like defenses go too high. So I think that speaks a little bit to Algier, and credit to him, he thrives in gap scheme running.
Hmm.
But when you add a player like Bijan Robinson, he could do everything. He could run inside zone. He could run outside zone. He could run gap plays, power plays within those gap plays,
Hmm.
and do everything. So when you're a play caller like Arthur Smith, you can call almost anything because you have
Hmm.
Bijan Robinson on the
Yeah.
field. Versus with Tyler Algier, you're either going to call trap, or you're going to call power, or you're going to call sweep. And with
Hmm.
Cordell Patterson, you're probably going to call sweep or toss like half of the time because it's basically like a mini kickoff return.
Yeah.
But just from a personnel perspective, I agree with you. This running back depth is like on par with the Saints already, in
Hmm.
my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah. And I feel like just because, Robinson is a rookie, Algier is going into a second year, and then Cordell Patterson's in his 30s, a lot of people are kind of just sleeping on this backfield. But I do think that they probably will surprise people with, winning a couple games they probably shouldn't, just because of how dynamic this running back room is. And I mean, we kind of saw that with the Giants last season in terms of, obviously Daniel Jones, he did take a step up last year, but, Saquon was lights out the whole for like when they're their first 8 games where they were like 7-1 or something. Saquon was just unstoppable, and I think that the Falcons have a similar build to kind of lead into that. Maybe not this year, but definitely in the next like year or two, I do see that this running back room just completely tearing the league apart.
Yeah, I could easily see it too. But I think the complementary aspect to it that definitely needs to be spoken about is Ritter.
Hmm.
Can
Yeah.
Ritter take that step up? Because if he
Hmm.
does, it's going to make this run game even more powerful because then he
Hmm.
can run play action to Kyle Pitts and Drake London
Hmm.
over the top when teams try to scheme that away. And when you're playing cat and mouse with the running game and play action, it's
Hmm.
only going to help this running back room out. So I think for the first like 5 weeks, I could see them surprise a couple teams
Hmm.
and really like I could easily see games where Ritter attempts like 10 to 15 passes a game
Yeah.
because they're running the ball so much. But how sustainable is that as you encounter the best offense in the leagues? They have a favorable schedule compared to most teams, but
Hmm.
I think we're so down on their record because we're not as confident with Ritter last season. Like just looking at his stats, yeah, he threw for 708 yards, but if you look at his average depth of target, it was or like his average passing yards, it was 6.2,
Mm-hmm.
and his passing yards were like 177 per game. There's just not enough of a sample size to see like
Mm-hmm.
can he carry this offense if need to.
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess just in the receiving game, I feel like they didn't add quite as much as, you'd hope for, I guess, for a developing young quarterback like this. And so I feel like despite his small sample size, I feel like we can get a decent gauge of, I guess, how he works with that offense. I mean, Bijan's phenomenal, but in terms of the rest of the receiving talent, they added John Smith, who might be the next big name, that can change up this team. But um, yeah, I feel like Desmond Ridder, he's the X factor, I guess. If he will make or break this team this upcoming year, and obviously both of us aren't high on him. But we can switch over to their defense now, right? Yep, got defense. Woo woo woo.
I
Obviously,
actually
they're
really like this team. I really like this team, especially we talked about the Jeff Okuda trade and how much of a less of a burden it would place on AJ Terrell
mhm,
in that defense. And I really like their secondary. I don't know much about Richie Grant, but like the other names like Terrell, Bates, Okuda,
mhm,
those are like that. It's another like secondary group where I'm just like it's close up to the Saints. It's not that far off.
mhm,
And I like Bud Dupree. I like Lorenzo Carter.
mhm,
Enough said about Jerry Greer. I can't even say his name right. Grady Jarrett.
mhm,
He is like he's right up there with Kenny Clark, like those level talents. And then obviously we talked about him last week, but Jeffrey Simmons, like he's
mhm,
right up there with those guys,
mhm,
and not that far off from Aaron Donald when you talk about defensive line play. Like one of
mhm,
the best. Like he used to wreak havoc on the tackle end. Now the 3-4 scheme he's playing the right defensive end, but he's just a game wrecker.
mhm,
And I think placing Calais Campbell around that, Anyamata is serviceable. Eddie Goldman is serviceable still right now. Um, they got some pieces there. It's just I could easily see this side of the ball also losing games because
mhm,
when you're matching up tight ends and two tight end sets against this team, I could easily see you
mhm,
taking the linebackers away.
mhm. Yeah, and I there are like me looking at it too. I think there are a couple of really good pieces on this defense, but like I mean, like Jesse Bates, arguably one of the best safeties in the league right now. I love Grady Jarrett. He's good. AJ Terrell's good. I still feel like Jeff Okuda has a lot to prove. He's obviously he went up high in the draft for a reason, but there's also a reason he was traded away from his team, and just, lack of success, and obviously injury plays into a little bit of that. But if theoretically injury just stays with him his entire career, then it's a little bit more of a, I guess, non-improvement for the Falcons right here, just because then you're going Mike Hughes, Darren Hall, is, I guess, your cornerback number two, and obviously they can. I mean, they are NFL cornerbacks for a reason, but still, again, it's can they step up to that number two role? And again, I feel like there's a fair amount of lack of depth in this defense, which I guess is my biggest concern amongst anything. And I feel like if one guy goes down, then it's just a huge gaping hole, I guess, for this defense that I don't know if they can fill, just with the lack of, I guess, great talent across the board, which hopefully that doesn't happen. But obviously, I feel like it's just inevitable with some of these players.
Yeah, and I think this also plays into the fact on why we rank them like pretty low,
Mm-hmm.
like as far as like win loss records, because this is also a side of the ball they can. It's not just like Ritter's going to make or break this team. They still have holes on this team even after the draft that could be addressed.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think Akuda still has it. When he's been available, he was able to hold Justin Jefferson in check. And
Mm-hmm.
Justin Jefferson is one of the best receivers in the NFL, if not
Mm-hmm.
the best. I think it's Jamar Chase, but I wouldn't argue with you if you think it's Justin Jefferson. And
Yeah.
he was able to help hold him in check. Think about how
Mm-hmm.
difficult that is from a technical standpoint to
Yeah.
just like time up his releases, jam him up, keeping short of the sticks. And it was not just him; it's other receivers like Devontae Adams. He played admirably against him. Like Jeff Okuda is not tasked with locking down a number one receiver anymore, which I think is going to help him get the confidence back to lock down a side of the field. This is a really good team if they're playing from ahead because they can rely on the pass rush a lot more. But if you have a team that's going to Falcons the Falcons, if you will, from the running game standpoint, I don't think they can stop them as far if you run the ball 40 to 50 times a game. I think you can wear this defense down where you don't have to test Terrell, Bates, and Akuda. That's my worry with this team. And especially like the depth you mentioned, it's not as great as what you would expect with other teams. I know we've touched upon Eddie Goldman, who I really liked, who I've been a fan of because I saw him play at Chicago. But other than that, there's a lot of like unknowns here where it's like, how many of these guys are going to step up when called upon?
So like again, there's a lot of question marks for this team. I think that led us to, not giving them the greatest of records. And I do think that all these teams I think in this division has that potential to outperform them, but I don't think it's looking so hot, especially just with the competition in the NFL. I think the one benefit they have is the fact that they do play in the NFC. I do think it is a weaker division, just looking at the teams as a whole, which I guess is good for them. But
and they could win on the special teams unit too. Like with just taking a quick look, like Cordell Patterson is one of the best kick returners in the NFL, and he can still function in the punt return if you need it. He's still like that's still a game changer even with the rule changes. And Younghoe Koo has been absolutely amazing from the kicker spot. I know you're joking off air. You think he's the best player on this team, even though you totally overlooked Bijan Robinson, Drake London, and Kyle Pitts. But their special teams units might be one of the best in the NFL as well.
It could be, so
that always like decides one or two games. Like you never know which ones they are. But with the parity in the NFL, this is a difference maker that they'll have to rely on for those one or two games because every game matters.
Yeah. And so I guess next up we got the Buccaneers. Yep, I have them going 7-10 as well, but obviously you're not super high on the Buccaneers going into the season, and I don't blame you. I think it is reasonable-ish. But
yeah, we had them exactly flipped. It's so funny. You're not as high on Falcons. I'm not as high on the Buccaneers. So it's just like a difference in how we see these teams going. I don't think their upside is as high as the Saints, even though I'm a huge fan of Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. Like I made a living over the past 3 years, like just drafting them on fantasy teams in rounds 4 and 5, and just having them produce at top 10 to 15 levels. And I'm kind of sad that Tom Brady retired because I'm like, I still want to get my bargain when everybody wants their wide receiver one, and you have Chris Godwin just sitting there for 4 rounds. But I just think there's so much a turnover from this team and the way they performed and ended off last year. It's a miracle they even made the playoffs last year, to be honest.
Yeah.
And with obviously Tom Brady was playing in this last year and he can only do so much. But I think with the transition of their offensive line, which was once a strength, to now like having Tom Brady gone and then having like question marks on your defensive line, there's a lot of questions this team needs to answer. And unlike the Falcons, their schedule is not as favorable.
Yeah.
Where they have a lot of like the tougher opponent draws because they won the division last year. So I struggle to see how this team puts together 7 or more wins.
This team definitely isn't that good, but like when you look at the games, I have them winning at least. I feel like if they were to win any games, it would probably be these games. But I do think that 7-10 might be their ceiling. And I feel like that's the big difference between this team's 7-10 and the Saints 7-10 is, the 7-10 I gave the Saints almost feels like a floor for them, whereas the 7-10 I give here for the Bucks is more likely a ceiling that this team has, and
I agree.
whereas
I agree.
which despite having the same record, it's like a completely different story, which I guess kind of makes the NFL fun because obviously, like obviously as a Broncos fan, I see how many one score losses that they experience, and it's like imagine a good head coach or a little bit more consistent quarterback play. All of a sudden, you go from this garbage record to a winning record, and I feel like a lot of other teams in the NFL can say that about their own records as well. And so I feel like there's a lot like in this division in particular, there's a lot of that. Potentially, they could be one score away from winning, and I feel like the Buccaneers will probably be closer to the one score losing, whereas the Saints could be closer to that one score winning type situation, which it's not fun for the Bucks, but here we are.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you're thinking about the teams that don't have that top 10 quarterback, that you immediately go like, oh, AFC East. I mean AFC top 10 quarterback. Automatic, they're going to the Super Bowl or going far deep in the playoffs.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have many of those teams in the NFC, and especially when we talk about the Buccaneers, despite like Baker Mayfield having a really good like spot start, like during the stretch of games on the Rams, like you just don't feel confident with him based on how he's performed in the past.
Mm-hmm.
And also, if you look at their draw, the first 4 games, these are all teams like maybe they squeak one by the Bears or the Saints because we underestimate them and they can pull 2-2. But I'm more confident in the opponents they face in the first 4 weeks beating them than I do them winning. It's just the
Mm-hmm.
state of their roster, the offensive changes, and I even see them easily losing to the Titans and the 49ers just because of that coaching stability. And you know what you're going to get from that quarterback, whereas you don't know what you're going to get from Baker Mayfield. And in the quarterback-driven league, that makes all the difference in the world to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean I have them losing, their first 5 games alongside you. I think this in particular is a really tough schedule. And obviously, like you said, they were first in the division last year. They're going to get the hard guys, and obviously, we see that in the records we give them. But we can switch over to their record real quick. And on offense, I do like a majority of this offense. Again, I do think that there are holes. I think Baker Mayfield's such a polarizing player to have, just because, like you said, it's like the spot start he had with the Rams. He played really good football at times, and I feel like we've seen him play really good football at times, but we've also seen him play really, really bad football. And like I want him to succeed. He seems like a cool guy, I feel like he's a great teammate to have on your team. It's just like he's so inconsistent. It sucks. But I mean, I guess just looking at the rest of this team, obviously Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, they're a dynamic duo. They've literally been talked about as like the best receiver duo for like, or at least in that conversation for like the past 5 years or something like that. Like,
I would even go farther. Maybe I don't know how long Mike Evans has been playing, but like past 10 years.
yeah. Well, I'm thinking like Chris Godwin came in to his own a little bit later than Mike Evans did, but yeah, I mean when Mike Evans was younger, he had like Vincent Jackson on the other side of him to play with, and so I feel like at least this receiver room as a whole has had 2 elite receivers, which again, not too many teams can boast of having 2 receivers of this tier, which is pretty nice. I think it's good for Baker, especially with Baker's type of football. I think that I don't know, he just throws a lot of wild passes, if that makes sense, and I feel like Mike Evans and Chris Godwin are the types of guys to catch that. Obviously, he had Odell in the past, but I don't know. I feel like it's a better room to have with this Bucks team, and then I'm a fan of the running backs as well. But what do you
I have
think
to
about this?
disagree with you there. I mean, yeah, they got a new offensive coordinator with Dave Canales, and he helped Geno Smith last year a lot, like
Mm-hmm.
with in part with the improvement, and also Geno helped himself. Let's give him credit for that,
Mm-hmm.
being one of the most improved offensive players we've seen over the past season. But I don't like their quarterback depth. I don't like their running back depth. And I think those are the 2 most important parts, especially
Mm-hmm.
when you're transitioning to a new for his signal caller and play calling style. Um, I think Baker Mayfield, he leaves the pocket way too much and way too early for that matter, and throws himself in situations where he could easily avoid it and doesn't make the ideal decision. And even when he's in the pocket, he he just doesn't make the right decision when
Mhm.
what you need as far as accuracy and ball placement. And I can say the similar things about Kyle Trask. I think Kyle Trask also has athletic limitations where he cannot scramble outside the pocket as effectively as other QBs. I like John Wolford, but I feel like you could figure out his game after 2 or 3 games if he's called upon to do that. So I think the tank for Caleb is real with this team. They could easily need a
Mhm.
talent like that to maximize what they already have with Evans and Galvin on the roster.
Mhm. Yeah.
And as far as White goes, I just don't think he has the technical sound game that Leonard Fournette does. And I think putting those
Mhm.
expectations on him to be that inside runner is not idealistic, especially if you
Mhm.
look at how Chase Edmonds and Keyshawn Vaughn like fit best on this team. They need more space and pass catching goals to really maximize what they can do. And the same thing with Rashad Wright. He doesn't have the inside zone and the inside game that you need to keep moving the chains. If you
Mhm.
look at the one stat I really like is the amount of first downs that each running back had last year. Leonard
Mhm.
Fournette, uh, Leonard Fournette almost had half of the first downs for this team. In fact, more than half. He had 39. This team running the ball had 79 first downs. Dude, that's a lot of moving the chains that makes it easier on quarterbacks like Baker Mayfield to pass in ideal situations, avoid those third and longs, those fourth and long situations. And Rashad White has to prove it to me.
Mhm.
I would not invest in him in as a starting running back. I know I'm being a little bit harsh on him,
Mhm.
but I think he functioned best when he had a running mate like Leonard Fournette.
Mhm.
So if Tampa gets a guy like Zeke to really take control of that, I feel a lot better about the situation.
Mhm.
But I think those are the two notable things to stand out before you even look at their lack of offensive line depth.
Yeah. I'm just looking. Yeah, I don't know. I feel like when I watched Rashad White play, I felt like he almost played some of his better ball uh when Fournette was not playing with him. Obviously, I think Fournette obviously was starting last season. He put up better numbers and whatnot, but I feel like once you let Rashad White get going, he he was able to pretty quickly find his rhythm, which I think led to a lot of, I guess, success for himself. Because I mean, if you look at the season as a whole, he had like 3.7 yards per carry, which is not necessarily ideal for a running back. But I mean, when you look at the games where he kind of picks it up with the carries, um, he has a fair. I mean, there's a few that suck, but there's a handful of not a handful, but like a few games where he does have. I mean, just good numbers, and obviously I haven't watched super deep into those game tapes, but he has shown those flashes that he can, I guess, lead a backfield on his own. And obviously, I don't know if it'll be as good as people are maybe hoping for, just because the fact that you don't have Tom Brady back there anymore. But um, I do think that Baker is also not that great of a quarterback, but he has games where he plays good. Rashad White has games where he plays good, and they are surrounded by a pretty solid cast on like the rest of the offense, which I think can help, I guess, just carry the team, if anything, where I mean, like I like their offensive line, their tight ends, okay, I guess, and then the receivers, I'm pretty big fans of, and I think that can help, I guess, alleviate some of the pressures that Baker and White might face, but at the same time, they do have a lot to prove ahead of them, which I understand what your concern is there.
Yeah, and I actually like Kate Otten. I think he really broke out last year. And then
Mm-hmm.
if you look at the the tight ends in front of him, he didn't really get an opportunity to showcase what he could do. But when he got the start, and he got the seam looks that he thrives on, and the outbreaking routes, and
Mm-hmm.
from Tom Brady, he really flashed. So he can also be a guy, safety blanket that can get you that
Mm-hmm.
5 yard hitch route that
Mm-hmm.
will help Baker Mayfield get in rhythm
Hmm.
with a short game, and also like complement Godwin and Evans. I
Hmm.
also like Russell Gage too in the role he's asked for. Like I
Hmm.
wouldn't like him in the wide receiver two, but I think he's a really good wide receiver three. I just look at the depth of the wide receivers too, and the types of running backs that they have in their roster, and I'm just like, where's like the Nick Chubb or like the Ezekiel Elliott type of inside runner that's gonna really help out Baker Mayfield? Because I think that complementary dynamic is extremely important to addressing the weakness. I just think they have a lot of weaknesses that will compile on each other, and I could easily see a game
Hmm.
where Baker throws like 3 to 4 interceptions and they fall behind
Yeah.
like double digits, and they're scrambling and they don't have like the pieces to like will get the game back touchdown by touchdown. And with with their losses on like the offensive line, I don't know much about Byler, Mock, or Gedeke. I know Gedeke started for them in the middle of last season, but um, other than Wirfs and Jensen, I don't feel confident about the offensive line that you would need to like help Baker and White basically.
Hmm. Yeah. Um. Yeah. I just think back, I guess, to pre Tom Brady, which granted is a decent bit ago, but I mean, when you had Jameis Winston here, you had, I mean, the focal points, which were Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, which, I mean, obviously they weren't a good team with Jameis Winston, but the team was built to just like let the ball fly, which, I mean, I feel like Baker probably will throw less picks than Jameis will. So I feel like again, it's in the realm of possibility that if they just let it fly and Baker somehow connects, then it can be good. But again, if that game plan doesn't work, obviously they're in trouble, and that's why you have them going like 3 wins, which makes a lot of sense. But yeah, we can switch over to the defense now, and I feel like the defense has a lot of good, like interesting pieces as well, maybe even better than the offense. I don't know how you feel about them, but
I think they're much better than the offense. Sorry, it's gonna be blunt about it. Much better.
Mhm. Yeah, I like a lot of the piece on this defense too. I think you're hoping that I don't know. I feel like even though they played good last year, I feel like they played worse than the year before, and so I think you're hoping for a big bounce back with a lot of their players coming into this next season if they are, not tanking and are going to go for a winning season and try to sneak into the playoffs.
Yeah, they lost a lot of pieces from that Super Bowl roster that I think would have helped them had a better season on the defensive end. But I always love the dynamic duo of White and David on the defensive end.
Hmm.
I think those two are probably like the best combination of linebackers in the NFL. You can argue that Roquan Smith and Patrick Queen are up there, but we still have to see more games from them. I think it's a proven duo. They play well off each other. And then you have the bookends with Shaquille Barrett and Joe Tryon Shoyinka. I love Tryon Shoyinka from the draft. I think he's excellent rusher. He definitely gets the quarterback. He definitely complements what Barrett likes to do. And I also like who they picked up in the draft in Kalijah Cansey because he's obviously not as good as Aaron Donald, like barely anybody is.
Hmm.
But he came from the same school. He plays with the same motor, and he has a really good pass rush bag. So
Hmm.
it's just a matter of like learning from Joe Tryonchenko, who just became a rookie in Todd Bowles' scheme, and then learning from the veterans like Vita Vea, Shaquille Barrett, Devin White, Lamonte David. They have the leaders on this team to make this defense as good as they previously were.
Hmm.
I think Ryan Neal was an underrated signing from the Seahawks. He had a pretty productive year for them. And I love me some Antoine Winfield. I wanted him so bad on the Bears, but they decided to get Cole Kmet. Not sure how I feel about that exactly, but I would have rather had Winfield. But you look at Jamel Dean and Carlson Davis, they're not going to knock your socks off with like shut down cornerbacks, but
Hmm.
they have their moments and they're capable starters.
Hmm.
So for the most part, I really like their top 11.
Hmm.
Um, it's just another question similar to Atlanta, where their depth is really really to be questioned. but
Mm-hmm.
I like their top 11 a lot better than Atlanta.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I think, this, again, it's like this defense has a lot of key pieces, but the holes can be pretty glaring if it like shows up, which sucks. But yeah, I did like their draft decent, but they got Clyde Cansey in the first. They drafted that tackle Cody Mock in the second, and then Yaya Diaby was the next guy they drafted, defensive lineman. So they got within their first three picks. I mean, all three of their first picks were guys in the trenches, whether it be the offensive or defensive line, which I guess is a pretty important part for this team right now.
For Caleb Williams.
Yeah, for Caleb Williams. And I mean, Baker Mayfield might have been the best, I guess, fill-in option at quarterback, looking at, I guess, the options they were presented this offseason, because, I mean, I don't think I feel like no one is really that high on Kyle Trask ever, maybe except when he was first drafted. But I feel like you look at the quarterbacks that were in free agency and the quarterbacks that were available during their draft position, and it's like, are you taking Will Levis here? I don't feel like Will Levis. This is a good spot for Will Levis to go. And then I look at the other quarterbacks. Like, did the quarterbacks even want to come to here? Because it seems like Carr was pretty set on the Saints. Rodgers was pretty set on his teams, and I feel like, I mean, we don't even know if Garoppolo will play this year because of his physical. But I feel like the Buccaneers are almost in scramble mode in terms of, I guess, figuring out who they were going to get at quarterback this offseason. And
yeah, and it's the similar question with Atlanta. Is the quarterback play going to elevate this team to a competent status where they can at least compete and allow their stars to be stars? And this almost reminds me of like the Bears roster when they had really good top 22. And then you're looking at can the quarterback be that guy? And I look at this team in a similar way where I'm not a believer in Baker Mayfield. I'm not even a believer in their running game. And that's a huge part of what's going to help this defense get their rest, get enough reps, really allow that pass rush to get home so they can create ideal situations for the offense. So if it's like a nip and tuck game, it's going to be very difficult for this defense because they're going to have a lot of possessions. But if they're in front and if they're in the lead, again, that pass rush is going to get home. It's going to be a lot easier for them.
Yeah, but we got one last team in this division here. We got the Carolina Panthers, which I guess we really have a lot of faith in too. Yeah, it's very admirable records we have for them. 3-14, 4-13. Yep, it's not looking so hot for them.
I think it's just the nature of this. Like a lot of this is like they're facing quality AFC teams that it's just the balance of the AFC and the NFC is tough. And then also they just got a new quarterback. They got a new coach. They got a new offensive coordinator. They lost DJ Moore. There's a lot of changes offensively they have to go through. They have really good defense. And they have a really good offensive line. And don't forget, they traded Christian McCaffrey away. How could I forget last season? There's just a lot of mid skill players that were added to that team, and I'm just like comparing them to the rest of their division. I'm not as confident as them beating Atlanta or the Saints. And then I look at the quality of teams in the NFC that they're facing, and I just don't think they're on par with them. Like even the Minnesota game, I could see them losing that. That's just like Minnesota can lose to anybody, so I just gave them a win there.
Yeah. Yeah, I think like the Falcons, I think both these teams are really young and are trying to, figure out what they have. And I wouldn't be surprised if both those teams in the next maybe like 3 years kind of this explode into, the faces of the NFC. Obviously, it feels like we're kind of in an NFC drought right now. I mean, we have like the Giants and the Commanders being like kind of the premier teams almost behind the Eagles right now, in the NFC. And I feel like there's a lot of, I guess, in the next couple of seasons, I do see a lot fluctuating in terms of, I guess, who the top dogs in the NFC are. And I think this could be a team like that. The Falcons could be a team like that. I think the Saints and the Bucks might be. I mean, the Bucks are confusing, but I feel like the Saints maybe they're trying to take advantage of a lot of the rebuilding teams right now, and shooting for a deep playoff run this season. But yeah, I feel like there's just a lot of potential for this Panthers team, like I said with the Falcons, and maybe we can kind of talk more about that with the rosters. But you got the
potential
Panthers
reigns supreme on the Panthers. Like potential is like the key with this team. Like 3 years from now, 2 years from now, this is going to be a really good team. This is going to be a really, really good team. But it's just they're in the state of transition, and that makes it hard. Like, could I see them make a run like in the last 4 or 5 games where they hit on a winning streak and there's a lot to like because Bryce Young finally has his rhythm? Yeah, I could see that. But I look at Miles Sanders, I look at Adam Thielen, I look at Hayden Hurst. They're all good contributors, and I think Adam Thielen can actually still be a number 1 wide receiver, just not in the mold. We talked about this when he got traded, but these are all guys that can get 1,000 yards, and like Hayden Hurst could easily get like 700, 800 yards because they're like playing from behind. Then they're just getting garbage stats too. That's a part of it, but it's a lot of young guys. I'm high on Matt Corral. I like Andy Golden as a backup. I like their quarterback room. I keep it on par with the Saints. Maybe I think they're better than the Saints, honestly, because I'm really high on Matt Corral. I loved him. He's one of my favorite QBs in the draft 2 years back, and when he was playing in Ole Miss, and I like that. And then another Ole Miss wide receiver I'm really high on, Jonathan Mingo. I talked about him in the draft. I think he could low key be like a number 1 boundary receiver that they need. So I could see him be a future number 1 on that team. It seems like everybody forgot about Laviska Shenault. There's so much hype around him coming from Colorado State and how he's just like an after the catch weapon, the next Deebo Samuel. I think he still has some potential there to be like a change up, to be a gadget player plus that could do more than just like be that jet sweep guy and green guy. So I like their wide receiver depth. I really do.
Yeah.
I really like their wide receiver depth. I think their offensive line is one of the best though in the division. If not I want to put it up there with the Eagles, but I look at Iguanu, who they just picked up. I looked at Brady Christensen, Bozeman, and Moton. And I look at those 4, and I'm like, I would love to have that on the Bears. Like if I had Justin Fields, who struggled with offensive line depth in the past couple seasons, and I have this offensive line, I'd be absolutely ecstatic. So this is an ideal situation for Bryce Young to develop. Now it's just a question of can they get the upgrades that I think they're a year away from to really make this offense be one of those premier contenders you're talking about.
Yeah, and I think I read that at least at the start of the season last year, this Panthers offensive line started out like around one of the worst in the league, but by the end of the season, they were rated about top 10, which it's a huge jump to have. And I think that, I guess the biggest question mark is can they sustain that level of play going into this season, especially with just a lot of other changing pieces on this offense.
They started out 3-0, like as a team last year, before they ran into eventual like pitfalls against like superior teams. This is a really good like unit outside of what they have in the quarterback play.
Yeah. But yeah, I think there's just a lot of changing pieces on this offense. Obviously, I feel like Terrence Marshall Jr. was on this team last year.
I'm still high on him. I think he has a lot to prove.
Oh no, yeah, I love Terrence Marshall. I'm just thinking of like the guys that they got newbies. I mean, you look at, Thielen's new, Chark is new, Mingo's new. I think they trade. I think they traded for Shenault last season. Did they not? Okay, so he's vaguely new. Shai Smith, I think, has been on the team for at least over a year, but I feel like there's a lot of new, and especially I mean you have Miles Sanders, he's new. Hayden Hurst is newer. Bryce, yeah, like there's just a lot of new pieces which you're just seeing who works well together. And I think the ideal situation for building up this roster is kind of trying to hope to go to that Jaguars route where at first Trevor Lawrence, yeah, he played good football, but obviously he had his struggles. The team also was having their struggles, but I think there's a lot of finding their identity in those first couple of years with Trevor Lawrence, and I think that the Panthers should try to follow suit with that in regards to see who works well with Young and maybe what is it that they're really trying to go for with Bryce Young. And I think if they follow that in 3 years, this Panthers team can be a force to be reckoned with. Yeah, I think Jonathan Mingo is a really interesting player on this team. Like you said, I think he has potential to be a number one. I know there's a lot of question marks around, I guess, the same question marks that the other, Ole Miss receivers had coming in when they were rookies, is in the fact that they're specimens, are phenomenal athletes, but will they, can they translate that into being an elite wide receiver? And I mean, we've seen that in the past that's happened with, AJ Brown, DK Metcalf, and I mean, I'm gonna stay optimistic as long as I can with him, but I think that's important to see if he's going to be elite or is he going to be another, Laviska Shenault where everyone talked big about him saying, oh, he's the next Deebo Samuel, but turns out he's more like a Deebo Samuel from wish.com. But, yeah, I do like DJ Chark. Obviously he hasn't had the greatest career, but he's been good basically everywhere he's went. And so I think there's a lot of really cool pieces on this team. It just a lot of new, which I guess is the biggest question mark. And you're just hoping Bryce develops well.
A lot of new and a lot of mid for the skill positions. I'm saying this because I like DJ Chark. I wanted the Bears to get him as a complimentary piece, in free agency, because he's cheap, he's going to be effective, he's going to outplay his contract, and I think he could easily be the wide receiver one on this team for this season too. Just because he has that veteran experience. It's just the question of how are the veterans like Sanders, Thielen, and Hurst gonna mesh with Bryce Young starting out? I think there's gonna be a little bit of that frustration period that comes in. It's just one of those things where next season it's if Bryce Young has T. Higgins or he has somebody from that core group of groups of wide receivers, if he has a Devontae Smith that moves to Carolina or you just name it. Or if Tyler Lockett decides to move on from the Seahawks and he goes to Carolina. I feel like he's that level piece away from really showing what he can do, but he needs the in-game experience that's going to come with this season. So there's going to be a lot of growing pains on the offense and struggles where the record is going to be worse than how they're going to unfold the next 2 or 3 seasons.
Yeah. I feel like probably my least favorite position group on this team is the tight end position.
Yeah.
I mean, Hayden Hurst has had his flashes, but I feel like every year everyone's Ian Thomas can take that step up. He is a younger player, so I feel with younger players you're always talking about their unlimited potential, and I was always a hopeful of, hey, maybe this is the year he does good, but it seems like he's not doing well, and I feel like Tommy Tremble is kind of in that similar boat of Ian Thomas of being, oh, could this be their year? And oh, it's not their year kind of situation, which is unfortunate. But I do think that, they do have a couple of years to figure things out with Bryce Young, which keeps me optimistic for whatever guys they end up bringing in. And,
Yeah, and this is the perfect draft to draft a tight end. This is the perfect draft. You have Sam Laporta, then you have Michael Mayer. Then you had I'm Dalton Kincaid, one of my he was my tight end 1 from that draft, who I was really high on, and the kid who's in on the Cowboys now, who I'm also really high, Luke Schumacher. They could have drafted any of those guys, and I think they would have been more effective from the tight end spot. This is the perfect team to draft from those spots. So I agree with you there. I think tight end might be the weakest link here.
Yeah, I guess the one reason they probably didn't go tight end was just because of their limited draft capital. They had 5 picks this draft, and so I guess the big question is: do you take Mingo or do you take a tight end at that 39th pick, and I feel like I feel like you'd probably rather go Mingo, like, potentially explosive wide receiver, especially when you don't necessarily know, even if you have a wide receiver one on this team. And so,
Yeah, I don't
um,
fault him taking Mingo. I was high on him. Like that wouldn't be like the decision making. Like I think some of the tight ends that went later in the draft you could have
mhm,
maybe tagged upon, but there's still time, and there's a lot of like tight end talent that
mhm,
teams are not going to have the price tag to match for free agency that you can go ahead and get.
mhm,
So it's not the
yeah,
end of the world, especially like they're kind of like in a no lose situation this year because
mhm,
it's everybody's rookie year basically on the most important pieces on this team.
mhm. Who knows? Maybe they get Bowers next year, and all of a sudden their tight end situation's chilling, and you're like, oh, I guess they'll just be an unstoppable duo for the next decade. But
There you
um,
go.
yeah, or maybe they get Harrison, and they have like an unstoppable receiver room that lasts them a decade too, and just a nightmare for everybody. But um, yeah, we'll kind of look at their defense now, I guess. Um, it's an interesting defense. What is your take on it?
I think it's underrated. They have a lot of like blue chip players at
Hmm.
key positions. Like they got the number one corner in JC Horn.
Hmm.
He's a lockdown. Nothing said. Safeties is Von Bell, Xavier Woods. They get the job done. They've been productive starters for other teams, and they
Hmm.
played well. Dante Jackson's good. CJ Henderson, you hope he does well after he was traded from the Jaguars.
Hmm.
I'm a fan of Jeremy Chin. Like
Hmm.
Jeremy Chin's always like I wanted the Bears to get him a couple years back. I know I keep saying this. There's always this like wish list of like great players. I'm like, dang, if only the Bears had him. But I love him. I love Vitir Gross Masos, Kamir Gruber
Hmm.
Hill. Um, I love their front four with Derek
Hmm.
Brown, Brian Burns, Henry Anderson, and Shy Tuttle. Especially Derek Brown and Brian Burns. I don't think they get
Hmm.
talked about enough.
Yeah.
Except for you saw how effective Burns could be.
Hmm.
The sack numbers really piled up for him last year. And then you have Shaq Thompson, who's a leader on that team from the linebacker spot. They're a long way like from the Luke Kuechly era
Hmm.
in the middle linebacker spot. So like I'm not expecting that by any means from this team, but this is a team that can keep you in games.
Hmm.
Like this is a unit that can keep you in games. They can still
Hmm.
build around it, especially like in their front four.
Hmm.
But this is a great start for a rebuilding team.
Yeah. Yeah. I think this defense has a lot of good, I guess, like startable players that I wouldn't be surprised, they could start on a lot of other teams. It just maybe it's not the elite talent that across the board that sometimes you'd hope for teams. But again, they are a young team, so there's a lot of room for these guys to develop. I do think there's a lot of potential with the backups on this team, which is obviously super huge for a rebuilding team. Um, and I think, yeah, they build on this. I think there's a lot to build on with this defense right here, and especially if next free agency or next draft, you get another key defensive player to add into the mix of everything. Then um, I think, yeah, like you said, this is really underrated, and I think they can really quickly take that next step up. Which again, which has me thinking that this team could easily be, like a top tier NFC team, potentially a top tier NFL team overall in the next 3 to 4 years.
Yeah, they really need to pick like what side they want to build out next year. They want to double down on offense and really make
Hmm.
that like scary, or if they want to
Hmm.
make sure the defense is built up and take advantage of the Bryce Young contract and try and sign free agents again to fill out the
Hmm.
rest of that offense. But I think the reason we have them scoring like as low as we did, even though we're pretty optimistic now, is there are still holes on this defense with unproven players where I could see teams take advantage because they just don't have the personnel right now
Hmm.
to compete. And that being said, I think our outlook on them is a lot more positive than Tampa Bay,
Hmm.
even though we have like similar scope of records for them.
Hmm.
So it's interesting. I could easily see them finishing like third or second in the division even
Hmm.
and overachieve. but
Hmm.
um, I would not be surprised if they're still picking in the top 10 in next year's draft
Hmm.
and trying to really gun for that Marvin Harrison Jr. or Brock Bowers because they need that talent up.
Hmm. Yeah. Honestly, I fear like outside of the Saints, theoretically, I think any of the other teams here could easily be picking in the top 10 in the next year's draft. Yeah, I feel like definitely the Falcons and the Panthers are built for a better future than the Buccaneers are, and
Agreed.
and I think that's why the Buccaneers went quarterback with they picked Baker Mayfield as quarterback. And I think they're just hoping that Baker can kind of switch it around and hopefully play good football because I do think that their championship window has pretty much closed. Because I'm just thinking, by the time they get if they do go the draft a quarterback route, like by the time that quarterback is drafted and is developed to be the guy for the Buccaneers, it's like is Mike Evans still productive? He's getting up there in age. Chris Godwin's getting up there in age in the next, when they're both in their 30s, is that when you're like I feel like that's a hard time to have a quarterback developing. Whereas it's good for the quarterback development, but it's hard for, long-term championship winning, which
And they'll probably want to go on new teams where they already have like most of the roster for that too.
mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and yeah, because I wouldn't be surprised if the Buccaneers if the Buccaneers are really, really bad this upcoming year, that they trade maybe Mike Evans, they trade maybe Chris Godwin away just to get more pick compensation to the Packers, of course.
Dang
to
it.
but to get that draft compensation just so that they can try to guarantee one of the top quarterbacks next season. And because I feel like a lot of teams are gunning for either Caleb Williams or Drake May or whoever becomes the next Zach Wilson and climbs up the draft boards like crazy, 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 crazy. But yeah, I think because there's a handful of NFC teams in that boat. Because the Commanders could theoretically not be that great, and they go for the quarterback route. You have the Cowboys theoretically. Dak Prescott doesn't have a bounce back year, and maybe we got to go for a new quarterback. The Broncos theoretically could go for a new quarterback if Wilson sucks. The Raiders could go. There's a lot of teams here that could go quarterback even if Justin Fields sucks. The Bears could be in potential like a potential room to take a quarterback if they do have the number one
I'm
overall
calling
pick.
cap on that. That's absolutely not going to happen.
Theoretically, Justin Fields plays worse than last year. You don't think the Bears would consider going for Caleb Williams at number one overall?
I don't think they'll be in a spot to pick him.
So I'm just
Like
saying.
I just had the Cardinals picking 1 and 15. I just don't think with that talent they're gonna go that low.
That's what I'm
I
saying.
understand the theoreticals. I just think there's too many teams that are
Well,
gonna be picking ahead of the Bears.
Yeah. Well, I'm just thinking like the Broncos. Like I'm assuming Russell Wilson's going to bounce back. But again, if he has a similar year to last year, the Broncos are definitely in a position to try to go for one of the top quarterbacks. And I think there's a handful of teams that do have a quarterback that can be good this season that could not be so good. Like the Cowboys, Dak Prescott could be there for the next 5-ish plus years, but also Dak Prescott hasn't really proved to win it when it matters for the Cowboys. And so it's like, do they move on from him? Same with Kyler Murray. There's a lot of guys that can be good, but there's a lot of prove it this year quarterbacks, in my opinion, that could put the Bears in a position that they might want to go quarterback. But
Yeah, we'll see. Like you have a fair point there. Like seriously speaking, like because if like as we were talking about with multiple teams in this division, particularly the Falcons and the Buccaneers, who knows? The Saints might opt to go that route if
mhm,
things like spiral from like Derek Carr on that team. We have high hopes for them based on how they built their roster,
mhm,
but there's easily 3 teams in that division. We talked about the Cardinals last week.
mhm,
We were looking at the Titans, and then like the teams you mentioned. I'm not. I think it's a little bit unlikely that the Broncos, the Bears, and the Cowboys are going to do worse, like
mhm,
from the quarterback play than they had last year. but you never know. You never know in
Mm-hmm.
this league. Like teams are always gunning for the quarterbacks. Like
Mm-hmm.
just look at this past year's draft. Like three of the top four QBs went in like the top 10 this year, and
Mm-hmm.
I just look at it and you have Caleb Williams, you have Jake May. Everybody's already raving about them,
Mm-hmm.
particularly the Caleb Williams.
Mm-hmm.
During this year's draft, people were obsessed over him, and I would not be surprised if there's a lot of trades and tanking this year that results in NFL fines, suspensions, things of that nature. Because hey, if you get your guy, you get the next Mahomes.
Mm-hmm.
Why not go for it? Why not go for it? So
Mm-hmm.
I hear you. I just think you're egregiously wrong.
Yeah, I mean, the Packers could be in that position too if Jordan Love sucks, and so.
I don't want them to be in that position. I want them to be like 8-8 or 7-10, like eight
Yeah.
and nine. Sorry, where they never get in that position to get that opportunity to do so. But all the best for Jordan Love. Like honestly speaking, like we don't wish like hurt on players. This is just a Chicagoan being a Chicagoan.
You
But
just wish for the suck on players and not the hurt.
I just wish for the teams and the fans to calm down, like and like really take stock of their team. I wish we had like a quarterback like Justin Fields for the past 15 years. That would save me tons of misery. But I can't turn back time.
Mhm.
I wish I had two Hall of Fame QBs for the past 20 years. So salty about that.
Yeah, you always have next year.
As all Cowboys fans and Bears fans say.
Yeah,
Always
and
next
the
year.
Broncos for the past 7 years, but
Noted. But they've actually won a couple Super Bowls though.
yeah, I can say that at least. The Broncos have sucked, but within the last 10 years, even though that 10 years is starting to run out, the Broncos have won a Super Bowl kind of recently, but obviously we don't want to keep this going for too long. So, obviously, if you like this podcast, remember to give us a like, tell us what you think. Remember to follow us on Instagram, amon.mission. It's pretty
Well
cool.
done.
We've kind of been slacking on it, but we are planning on posting our records, predictions, or whatever. And so let us know what you think of those records when we actually post them. It'll probably be easier to react that way. But anyways, see you next time. Peace out.
Good night, guys. Take it easy.